Good evening. Wow, it's really something to be here at Sewanee. I didn't think there were rattlesnakes here. I thought I got away from that in Montana. I wanted to say just one thing about the Lost Journals of Sacagawea. Non-native historians say that Sacagawea was born in 1788, which would have placed her at 16 years of age when Lewis and Clark came. I don't believe she was 16 years old. I think she was 12, maybe 13 years old and pregnant, and then she had her child. And there's many things when you begin to look at, and I'll talk about this in my talk, but when I was writing this story, I wrote it gleefully. I was writing with kind of, hearing the sounds, like those cicadas outside, that sound where a story speaks to you and you listen. And then I was asked to read. I just sent it off. It's the first time I just sent it off, and I didn't even read it over. Isn't that terrible? I sent it off, and I was asked to read for an interview, a radio interview with the wonderful former student Lauren Korn. She does the right question. Great. She's interviewed Adrienne. She's interviewed a lot of really significant writers. And she asked me to read a passage, and I choked up, which was really surprising to me. There's so much grief in this story. So the trigger warning is, it was a hard story for Sacagawea, not the great mythology of Lewis and Clark. This piece is called Day of Pummel Women, and it was the impetus for my writing The Lost Journals of Sacagawea when I discovered that Sergeant Ordway had taken a wife for dark nights, and she ended up, her husband gave her and then felt bad about it, and then he stabbed her and beat her, and she ended up by the interpreter's campfire. And I read that over and over and over again in my life, the interpreter's campfire, and when it finally dawned on me that it wasn't Charbonneau, it had to have been Sacagawea. So, of Pummel Women. Otter Woman and I gather driftwood. We build a great fire and stand near. We drink hot, bitter coffee and visit. Wind skitters through Mandan. It is so cold, we wrap in buffalo robes and line our moccasins with cattail fluff and rabbit fur. We have not seen buffalo for days. The people fear buffalo will not return. Otter Woman whispers stories. She wishes to live with alive beside Arrow. She wishes to have his babies. She wishes to leave Charbonneau, man who plagues us. We hear high laughter, devil titter, coyote laugh, cry. Smell rises from camp, mouse sniff, blacksmith clink, blood lick from a white man's knife. Animal scutters past, my scalp tingles. Corn Necklace calls out to us from darkness. My sister, she shouts. Many Teeth walks slowly beside Corn Necklace. She limps, cradles her ribs, and then stops. She steps again so slowly she moves little. Her head steams like boil pots. Her face rains sweat. I smell sting blood, copper kettle stench. I go to her. Corn Necklace and I hold up many teeth, but as we walk, I feel hot, wet soak my side. I look beside and behind and see blood trail. I send Otter Woman for Clark and for blankets and she returns with Clark's medicine bag. We sit many teeth down by fire. She hisses with pain. Her jaw is spoiling meat, black, raccoon black, blood settled black. She becomes old horse with rattler-bitten face. Her chest bruised the color of smoked suns. My husband beat me, she chatters, through broken teeth. He stabbed me so many times I cry for my children. We pack her wounds. Her eyes flutter white. All around her blood darkened snow. Man smitters and sneaks toward us like we are deer herd. Hard snow cricks beneath his footsteps. Broke leg cannot slink on anyone. Corn necklace stands to shield many teeth. We roar at him. We lurch at him. We kick. My robe staggers heat. I've flamed so hot I can melt more snows than fire. Otter woman grabs long driftwood and beats broke leg. We surround him, screaming. We push him. We grab his knife. He cannot get past us. He whimpers like a baby. Clark hears the commotion. He is too late. We have driven broke leg back to darkness. We will chase him from our lodge, Corn Necklace says. We will scratch him with poison arrows. We will tie him up with elk rope and drag him to the river. We will whip him like a dog. Clark backs away from us. Yes, Corn Necklace tells him in Mandan, you should go or we take you. You brought this to our women. You brought ugly men to our camp. Fire hisses and wood drops into 100 sparks. Day of no good alone. Men follow me everywhere. Charbonneau meets Lewis's men away from camp, out of sight of Lewis and Clark. He hunkers in bushes with these war men and hunters and returns with treasures, a great pouch of wine, a clunky emerald ring, a sack full of trade beads and musket balls. Men no longer peek at me. They are bold as crows. They peck at me, gawk at me. They close in on me and sniff. They fumble for my cunt if I pass too close. When I feed Jean-Baptiste, they rub their swelled cocks. I clench wedge rocks in my fists, make knives from splintered trees, and sharpen them in fire until they can slice knuckle bones. I hide them where I squat. May I have a word with you, Captain Clark? Lewis asks. Will you excuse us, men? Lewis wolf-eyes his men, and they skulk to other chores. Yorks keeps his head down, his eyes down, his shoulders down. He makes sure supplies are dry. He works when others stop. He heaves heavy kegs from boats every day, every night. He empties boats filled with water, while Clark tells him to empty boats filled with water. What York hears is little nothing to Clark. Christ, Charbonneau, has the balls of a buffalo, Lewis says. I listen. Clark rubs rabbit brush between his palms, listens, his eyebrows pinched. Lewis calls York over. They keep their gatter voices low. They look my way. I look away. Clark places his hand on York's shoulder and squeezes. That's your job now, York, Clark says, when he lets go. York shades his eyes and looks at me. His mouth bends upward. He is not smiling. When I wash Jean-Baptiste, York is there. When I squat to shit, York turns his back. When I take Jean-Baptiste to my teat, York waits. When Jean-Baptiste cries, York listens. In the blackest night, when moon is cloud-covered and animals still, York rises to watch me piss, to watch me walk Jean-Baptiste, to watch me. Would I feel safe if I did not understand? Would their words still butcher me? I point to elk spleen, and Clark gives it to me with a smile. I gather ants in my water pouch and leave them in Dubai until they dry to powder. On a hot rock, I decay spleen, and when it withers, I pound ants and spleen together to make a dark, sticky dust that can poison any man, any animal. I can kill the devil. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. God, it's so great to be back here. Thank you, Deborah. What a just extraordinary gift that reading was, and it's an honor to share the stage with you. And what a gift this place is. So thank you to Leah, Gwen, and Adam, and now Travis. Welcome, Travis, for having me back. And thank you, too, to the staff who I think do so much to create this amazing community space. I feel like we're just starting to experience the community aspect, and then like it's going to grow and grow and grow in the days ahead. Karaoke is going to build it. And thank you to my workshop co-leader, Elena. I'm so glad we could reprise our routine, and to our fabulous workshop we met this morning. And to the rest of you. My favorite thing about Sewanee is all the conversations we all have, the community that forms. This place is magic, and I look forward to talking to all of you in the days ahead. So when I first came here in 2021, I was just about to embark, literally just days after Sewanee ended, like when I was like in that super tired fugue state. I threw all my stuff in storage, and I set out on 2 years of travel that I spent researching and writing a book called Both and Neither that is now terrifyingly due this fall. It's a book I sold in 2020 on a very straightforward proposal. Oops. It was meant to be a historical overview of genders beyond the binary, juxtaposed with memoir. It was going to be hopeful. Oops. More to say about that in the craft talk. Yeah, I really just thought history, personal, cool. It was going to obey genre lines pretty neatly. And then I was about halfway through, and that idea just totally failed. I started to question what exactly I was researching in the history when so much of the history I cared about wasn't recorded, and when the history that was recorded was reinforcing all the problems with history. And so I started thinking, as it failed, about what Jack Halberstam calls the queer art of failure. So I should side note, some of what I'm about to read to you tonight, I have read before. I wrote over the last couple of years. Some of it I wrote 2 weeks ago. So this is terrifying. Okay, as I write, draft in progress. As I write in the current prologue, everything I am because I failed to be something else. I'm a writer because I failed to become a lawyer. Not in the sense of failing at school, but in that I've always been very bad at following through with things that aren't true to who I am. I am queer because I failed to be straight. I am trans because I failed to be cis. I'm writing you this book because I failed to write you the other. This book is not an overview. It is deeply personal, deeply idiosyncratic. It is a book of my particular ghosts, of the dead I carry with me to make historical sense of who I am. It is also a book of my ghosts still living, the people, often romantic partners, who taught me with their bodies who I am in mine. It is a book about how we make one another possible. I could say it is a memoir, but a memoir often has as its center one person, one life, and participates in the fiction that we are solitary. So perhaps it is a failed memoir. I could say it is a history, but it is one led by my own imagining. So it is a failed history. It's not a history, it's a romance. It's not a history, it is a hunger. So this is from that book. It's called Both and Neither. It'll be out in 2026 from Doubleday. I'm going to read to you from the first section of the book. The only things you need to know are that it interweaves the life of a man you'll meet named Joseph Lobdell, who was very real, with a part of my life. Joseph's about 25 when you meet him. And it interweaves part of my life when I had just made the spectacularly dumb decision to leave a woman I love named Nika in Boston and move to Allentown, Pennsylvania, and was kind of closeted and lonely and stuck. Okay, but we're going to start with Joseph. The year is 1855, and there are immediately rumors about the singing teacher who has arrived in town. His age: he is said to be in his 20s, but with his smooth jawline, something soft about his face, looks younger. His bearing: he is formal with the mothers, unfailingly courteous, reassuring to them about how much potential he sees in their daughters. And among those daughters, he's a sensation. I picture him now, and if I want to make this part fun, who can blame me? If my imaginings are fantasy, so be it, for they are no more fantasy than the historical record is. A record only of officialdom and pain, of ostracization, of violence. History's fantasy, therefore, of a life stripped bare of pleasure for his failure to conform. To hell with that. In Bethany, Pennsylvania, Joseph Lobdell is having fun. He has traveled only 25 miles south, but he has found a town in which no one recognizes his face from the newspapers. No one knows his family. A life of loneliness on the run is transformed now, somehow, to the object of all these girls, shy, sly looking. They wear wide silk and linen dresses with necklines he reckons they must have bargained with their mothers over, unless. And he enjoys this thought even more, perhaps, its intimation of respectability. The mothers noted his unmarried status and themselves urged the daughters into these dresses that show their creamy clavicles, their silvered throats. He himself dresses carefully each morning he will see them. In the old mirror propped up on a dresser in the boarding house, he watches himself grasp a strip of muslin and wrap it tightly around his chest, as tightly as he can stand. The end he tucks in so what was wrapped previously will secure it, then fastens a pin through the closure, taking care. Too many times the pin has come undone through the day and stabs him when he demonstrates for the young ladies how to brace their shoulders, square themselves, and fill their lungs with air. He rests a hand on his abdomen then, so they can see the way air fills him. Watch how breath bellows out the space that once was. No surgery was available to him. No hormones. So when I follow him as he walks along a narrow wooded lane from the last home of the day to the boarding house where the landlady has hung a gas lantern flickering yellow through sooty glass over the doorway that now passes for home, it is his body I am thinking of. His body I can imagine only through my own. The cool kiss of the night air against his cheekbones, the scent of cedar and fir, the bright slice of moon above, and the dusting of stars. Perhaps an owl hoots in the distance. Perhaps a barn swallow headed home to his roost for the night swoops low over his shoulder, and perhaps that barn swallow is me, and I am the ghost of the future, watching him now, accompanying him in the shape his shadow makes under the moonlight, his pants legs, the crest of his hat, the way the lines of his clothing render his shadow a man's, make him visible to the present and to the future, to me as the past. He does not notice me looking. Perhaps he steadies his breathing to the metronome of his footfall. I am chasing him on the hunt for history, but his mind wanders back to the blush of the girl's cheeks, to the open O of her pink mouth as she strove for a note he marked for her on the paper. He had to look down at the piano key then. It was a fine piano, of gleaming rosewood, the kind that marked a fine home and a fine parlor, and smelled faintly of its wood and faintly of the walnut oil the maid had rubbed into it, and the cushion he sat on was plush teal velvet, and the home softened with thick curtains, and though he has not met the man of the house, Joseph can imagine that man's fine whiskers and waistcoat and the silver case of tobacco he carries in his breast pocket over his broad, strong, flat chest. He pauses on the lane to straighten his shoulders, and imagines that his shirt, when he stands this way, does not pull. I wonder if he was ever bittersweet in those homes, the markers of which he could not have and maybe did not want but also could not have, the way I get in the suburban homes of my sisters, with their staircases and throw blankets over the couch and kitchen islands, the way, standing at the threshold at Christmas, a glass of wine steadying my hand, I feel as lost and bereft, as full of possibility, as a traveler from another life, another world, another time. Why can I only imagine pain in his body for him? Perhaps he loved his chest, the dip of his waist, the curve of his hip. Perhaps it's only my modern eye, always on the look for the tell, that worries. I now love my flesh, but once I starved myself to destroy it. It has taken me a lifetime to love it. I hate only what other people conclude in response. The not being seen, the never, except by a lover, being seen. But I know the history, though it can be hard for me to believe. For Joseph, it was easier to pass. That once, the world full of less suspicious eyes, the mind might have taken what it was offered and accepted it, even thought it fashionable. A hairless jawline? A sign of refinement. A higher voice? Purity at the ready. Not just a man, but a better one. Chest could be bound, layered over in stiff fabric. I've been on testosterone for 5 years now. Still, I need only shave once a week. I would like facial hair, but I pass the blade to sever it because what crops up is only 5 or 6 sparse black stalks. Still so few they look like a mistake. I bristle at the thought of top surgery, right for so many people, but not for me, as I'm comfortable with my chest as part of me. I only hate what people conclude from it. And it has never felt right to me to undergo a knife just so that people won't think a thing. I am, in other words, stubborn. Stubborn and possibly unwise, since I notice how every time how what my clothing and hair help build is undone with a flicker of eyes from my face to my chest, a flicker that results in me being called ma'am. Stubbornness, a lover once told me, is a precondition of transness. I will keep what is mine. Joseph must make himself from what is his, but he didn't have to contend with the suspicious eye either. No cultural conception of the trans person to fear, so no cultural conception of the trans person to out. No cultural conception of the trans person. Such loneliness. What happened with the girl who will be Joseph's undoing? Such a pivotal moment, this first girl in Bethany, the first time he tries to believe he can live as who he is, and yet history cares for the details not at all. She does not even have a name, this girl at the piano he tutors, for there is nothing history would care for in the body of a young girl, pretty enough to draw his eye, kind enough to her with her gaze, forgive or omit his hips, romantic enough to yearn for those hairless cheeks of his, the high flute sound of the air from his lips. All I know is that she was one of his pupils. What grew between them was an attraction, a force unaccounted for in the pages of history. What grew between them had the force of imagining, of want, of wish, of longing. A sound is invisible, yet can still be heard. Particles vibrating in the air, the invisible moving invisibly within the invisible. He placed his hands on the keyboard, and the skin of her chest trembled at the long tapered shape of his fingers, the touch she imagined impossible and yet as present in the room as a ghost. She drew in a long breath before the note, and he blushed to hear it. Something wordless and growing. Tonight, he is still safe, sheltered by the trees, sheltered by the night birds that pass overhead. If I could, I would keep him here, sheltered by me. But in a week, at the lesson's end, she will follow him outside. A pretense. He has left behind a sheet of music, and though she could have just waited until he returned, instead she will call out his name. The sound made by her invisible breath is a force that will change his history. After weeks and then months in the Allentown life I had now made for myself, missing Nika, I drove to a grim little porn shop on the highway. and found a slim white vibrator for only a couple of bucks, lucking out, for somehow this flimsy thing was perfectly calibrated to the rhythms of my body. I passed night after night anew then, crying out Nika's name, slick with a pleasurable kind of grief. I had hoped that I might excise her, that somehow with the rippling of my body when I came, I would cast her from me. I had never before felt desire so strong. I didn't yet understand that ceding to it would only strengthen it. Soon, the sense memory of her muscles around my fist, of her wet mouth, and the sweat slick of her curls against her forehead would overtake me. I remember pulling up to a stoplight and being slammed with the sensation, suddenly unable to drive, only ache, as the light turned green and behind me, drivers blared their horns. That night, a sentence came to me. I wrote it in black ink on a pink Post-it, which I stuck next to my bed. The next morning, I bought a set of Crane note cards on the internet, a luxury on my salary then. I knew that I would never use the rest of the stack, that I was paying the entire sum for one card, the one card that would be my one statement for Nika. The cards were made of thick ivory paper. On the front, an embossed goldfish, shiny and glorious, with a fan tail like the more dangerous betta fish, and I suppose I liked that even then. Nothing childish about the choice, but the luck of the goldfish, the beauty of its gleam, the promised danger of this tail, the way we gleamed for each other, the way we now ached. A decade has passed. As I write this, the remaining cards sit in a box to the left of my desk. I have never used them. I cannot throw them out. Maybe I need this gold flash of my becoming, this relic of right faith. All these years later, and the feeling of pressing the black ink nub to the ivory page and watching the words I made take stark form remains. The feeling of ushering whatever might come next into being. I didn't sign the card. I put no return address on the envelope. I felt certain she would know that it came from me, and that whatever the conditions of her life, had she fallen in love with someone else? Did she no longer miss me the way I did her? Knowledge of my desire, at least, would be welcome. 3 days or so later, an email. I still think of you too. As I read, I remember making the decision not to think, not to question, not to pause, as though choosing to turn down a corridor without knowledge of what lay at its end. I typed, "Want to do something about it?" The rules we negotiated quickly. I would choose a motel halfway between our cities, secure the reservation, and tell her the time at which to meet me. She would arrive to the room. One night, never again. That obviously worked out. Yeah, sure. But the biggest rule, the one meant to protect us from each other, as though our bodies could carry out a liaison wholly separate from who we were, we two people of words, and wholly separate from the stories that already existed between us, our gnarled past, as though if we did not give breath, it would vanish, no speaking. The hotel I'd chosen turned out in person to be at once nondescript and ornate, its vacuous name done in gilded script, the floors carpeted in burgundy and edged in chrome. Its design meant to gesture to a grandeur dreamed up in our babyhoods, most likely, now gone tacky, the carpeting faded and stained. But the room itself had been wiped clean. It smelled faintly astringent, and I recall feeling foolish for not having thought to bring a candle. What would Nika think of that smell? How could I ask her to bear herself to me in air so sharp? And the bed was large, and the door clicked closed behind me. I had a bottle of sweet white wine in my backpack. She liked sweet things. And a round plastic speaker I ran a cord to from my home phone, and I fluffed the pillows and adjusted the music and unwrapped the plastic cups from the bathroom. I must have wondered if she'd show, but if I worried, I can't recall that now. Whatever would come felt fated. Maybe 10 minutes passed. Maybe an hour. Lucky. That was the word I thought when I opened the door to her knock and saw her hair falling in waves that cupped her shoulders, her white shirt at once crisp and diaphanous, unbuttoned low and knotted at her waist to show the cant of her hips with their raised starburst scar, and the black stiletto boots she'd pulled up high over her tight jeans. That we had decided there would be no words meant I didn't have to speak any. I just stepped to her and bowed my head to the warm burrow between her breasts, then lifted my lips to hers. In seconds, I had her pinned against the rough wallpaper, my hands running the curves at her side and the swell of her breasts, then twisted in her hair. Her hair always confused my senses, made me feel like my hands themselves could smell, the sensation of its twist around my fingers and the scent of her tangling, consciousness tangling. I bit her lip. Into the sweet dark of her mouth, I gasped. One of us laughed, and then the other, and then we were both laughing. The bell peal sound was startling. We'd been so silent, but true. Maybe that's where I said the words to her. Maybe in that pillowed bed, or maybe in the motel we took the next weekend, where an aging white rock star in a wheelchair and a red ball cap with fake dreadlocks attached was checking in downstairs, and both the hotel clerk and his wheelchair attendant were so deferential, words slipped out of us as though through a crack. We hadn't meant to speak, but who was this man with the fake dreadlocks like worn strands of carpet? And why, if the clerk was so awed by him, would he be here? In this motel we'd chosen precisely because it was close to nothing and no one, precisely because of every bit of grandeur it lacked, as though the dinginess of those rooms where our bodies found each other was the only way to truly see the blaze we made. After I pulled my fist out of her, I wept, both of us naked and sweaty and spent, my head against her chest, that curtain of curls over my nose and eyes. I wept in gratitude and maybe in embarrassment. I wept to be home, and I wept because if she hadn't known she was home before, she knew now. I wept with the relief from all the wanting, from my loneliness and my grief. And I wept because there were only our bodies in the room, and there was no point, naked as I was, in hiding. I didn't plan the words that came next, the speaking of which would so alter my life. They just came. I'm not, I said, my mouth still at her chest, my words wet with tears, my fingers held by her hair. I don't feel like, I've never felt like, I don't think I'm a woman. And her, bless her. Bless the soft shelter her chest gives my cheek. Bless her warm palms over my ribcage. Bless the space created by her cupping, by the way she seems to hold me as I am and who I will become. Because she says only, I know. Maybe that would have been enough had we stayed together. Typing that feels vulnerable to admit that I scarcely know how this story might have gone. But I lived with a secret for so long, how can I claim to know I wouldn't have kept it still? The research files I keep of the dead, the books I read, are full of lives held shut like lips to the very end. Silence costs a great deal, but it is possible to choose that cost or be forced into it. Maybe it would have been possible to live a whole life in the beds we made together, when I was one thing in the cold-eyed world beyond and quite another with her. Maybe I wouldn't have needed words for me if we didn't have to speak them. Maybe parts of my body could have gone as unquestioned as unspoken. Touch doesn't categorize, doesn't require language. A romantic idea, I know, to wish that any one moment could have been suspended into a lifetime. But what if? What if? A man outs Joseph, maybe. That's how one tale has it, that the girl who has been most catching his glances, returning his blushes, the girl to whom he has dared to whisper a promise, and either he means it or she just thinks he does, but she says something too much to the man to whom she is already betrothed, and that's it. And that man looks with different eyes, and he sees. And Joseph's secret curdles the problem from jealousy into something more poisonous, sharpens knowledge like a knife. Or she discovers who he is. Maybe when he is finally brave enough to embrace her, and he feels for the first time the soft brush of hair against his cheek, tickling his nostrils, brushing softly against his lips. Maybe he is lost to the inhale of her, and at first her heart rises to be against his chest, but then something in her shifts imperceptibly to noticing the softness that had felt so comforting, suddenly suspect. a swell of chest in their embrace, a misspoken word about childhood, perhaps. Or maybe, why not? Maybe he just tells her, trusting her, and wanting to be seen and made reckless, finally, by hope. He has lived this way for months now, after all, and it has not only worked, it has been beautiful. He has a job, an income, a life, faces he sees day after day, the sound of him being called the right name and the sweet plush gift of her lips, just a brush, but a promise he must feel of more. He has all this, and it is good. And he has always been who he is. Nothing has changed. So why would he not tell her? Why not imagine himself loved? She warns him. I cling to that she warned him. I cannot bear to imagine the crowd that comes for him. Cannot bear to imagine his face, hers, scenes from every movie about a trans person, scenes from fears so often realized, scenes from lives lived in anticipation of violence. Let history find its imaginings of this moment elsewhere. For Joseph, I want only this. He flees.